HPTI risk approach is about how a person manages conflict, difficulty, challenges in the workplace, anything with that element of risk. Right? So every workplace has some element of interpersonal conflict or personal challenges, career challenges, difficulties that's going to arise for everyone at some point in time. But a person's risk approach level explains how they approach that. So people with high risk approach, it tends to be a more proactive approach. So it's not a bullying or confrontational approach necessarily in the optimal level. It's a more proactive approach to solving problems, kind of carefully and considerately approaching the problems instead of reacting to them. People with lower risk approach tend to have a more reactive, instinctual fight or flight response. So part of that is related to anxiety levels, but part of it is from the idea from positive psychology that people in positive mental states or frames of mind can take a more proactive, more thoughtful, more considerate approach to solving problems and managing risk. So people in a positive mental state have a wider range of potential responses and then tend to choose the most constructive or proactive ones. So we see at the kind of higher optimal levels of risk approach, people take that kind of proactive approach to managing, solving, and dealing with conflict. That's especially important for a leadership position because people in leadership roles are ultimately responsible for managing and resolving conflict. They have to be, because at one point in time, it's going to get to your desk. And if things go unresolved, then they tend to fester, they tend to get worse. And so having that proactive approach to risk about managing it and dealing with it in an effective, constructive way is so important. And that's characteristic of people with higher risk approach. Now, at the extreme or excessive ends of risk approach, it can be too much. Right? There can be too much of a direct approach to risk, especially for people who are lower on the spectrum of risk approach. So again, because there is some relationship between risk approach and potential anxiety or worry, concern, adjustment levels, people with lower risk approach tend to have a more reactive approach to risk. It's that instinctual approach. So it's usually either fight or flight, you know? That reactive instinctual approach can be run away from, avoid the problem, or it can be blow up, explode, get angry in response to the problem. But it's that kind of instant response, not the more considered proactive approach to solving the risk. It's an immediate response to the risk. So people with lower risk approach levels often tend to avoid conflict or challenge. No, strike that. So people with lower levels of risk approach are more likely to avoid risky situations. Now, there's two ways we can look at risk. We can look at interpersonal risks. So that is conflict between people. That's, the risk of having a fight or an argument or a dispute that goes completely wrong. Or there's career risk. So that's how much risk are you willing to take on in difficult projects, challenging assignments? How much level of risk are you prepared to approach and to deal with in that way? And sometimes we see variations, right? Some people who are very good at taking risks individually, but are very conflict averse. So there's some nuance that'll show up within that risk approach scale. But generally, we can look at that approach to risk as either kind of proactive, higher risk approach, or reactive, lower risk approach. And it really depends on the career and the job for what level of risk approach fits, right? For some people, it's good to have a lower level of risk approach. But ultimately, if you're in a leadership or a management position, it's good to be proactive about managing risk because problems are going to get worse over time if they go unresolved, if they fester, and if you're not doing something proactively to manage them.